Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Doctor Who as well as the latest episode of Class. Like always, if I'm talking about something that you want to listen to, you can always look in the description down below. I include the time when I start talking about each of the respective shows. So, for example, if you don't want to hear what I had to say about this week's episode of Doctor Who, you can skip to what I had to say about this week's episode of Class. But the first thing we're going to talk about is this week's episode of Doctor Who. A very, very good episode of Doctor Who. Obviously, basically, this whole premise of this episode is kind of revolves around this title called Veritas, which, obviously the episode brings up, means truth. Which I find it funny. Like, I already knew that. I think that's Latin, isn't it? I only know it because there is a Korean manga called that has that same thing as a title, Veritas or Veritas, depending on how you want to pronounce it. I've always said Veritas, but Veritas, whatever the case may be. And because of that, like, I ended up looking it up, and I was like, oh, it means truth. I think they may even brought it up in the manga, but nevertheless, I get the feeling like it's also pulled from a mythological standpoint too. Like, there's a god named Veritas, like the god of truth or something like that. That could be complete and utter bullcrap that I'm making up, that I'm thinking of something else. But nevertheless, that's the main premise behind this episode, because apparently the Pope comes to visit the Doctor, even though he's still blind and everything, not telling anyone, which led to an interesting conversation between him and Naruto, because Naruto's like, okay, I get it, you don't want to tell your enemies you're blind because you don't want to be at a disadvantage, but it's like, why not tell Bill? Like, you don't trust Bill? And he's like, for him, it's like, he's like, no, because it's like, if I tell Bill, then she'll want to try and help me. It's like, I'm the one that's supposed to help people. So I think I brought it up last episode, but it's definitely a pride thing, where it's like, I'm supposed to be the smart one who's always got the answer, who always has the solutions and stuff like that. And if I'm blind, it just puts me at a disadvantage. And it's just like, I shouldn't have to rely on other people, which he kind of does. But, it's, I guess his way of thinking, which even Naruto kind of calls him out for. He's like, you're an idiot. And he's like, what's the Doctor kind of response? Like, well, everyone knows that. But nevertheless, getting back to it, the Pope has come to the Doctor about this whole situation of like, hey, we need your help with this, because there's this thing called Veritas. It's some forbidden text that people have translated, and everyone that's translated it has died. And it's like, okay, like, this is some serious stuff. So they go to the Vatican. I mean, not after dropping off at Bill's place, where she's getting close to a lady friend named Penny. Which, side note, I'm guessing that means her roommate doesn't know, or at least her flatmate. At least that's who I assume that is. I mean, this is like her third or fourth time seeing her pop up, maybe? I don't know. Nevertheless, she's like, oh, I hope you ever brought some guy over. And it's like, she was like, oh no, she's Penny. And she's like, oh, she's a friend. Oh, I thought you dragged some unsavory guy here or something like that. Well, you just do it. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. So I don't think she knows. But it seems like Penny was kind of under the impression like, oh, I don't know if I'm comfortable doing this. Which, like, Bill's like, the fact of the matter is, we haven't done anything. This isn't anything, So there's nothing to feel guilty about. And then she sees the Pope. She's like, Bill, the Pope just came out your room. What's up with that? He's like, Bill's like, don't feel like, and then they go in and they see a priest, the TARDIS, and it's just like too much, and she runs off. Now, to me, like, the underlining layer there, I'm like, is it kind of a religious angle? Why is this whole like weirdness around Bill? I mean, is it just because just the weirdness, the fact is like all this is in her room, and it's just kind of like, well, what kind of weird stuff are you into? Or is it just because of like it's the Pope and just the religious angle being like, oh, maybe I shouldn't all be like, with Bill type. I don't know. But nevertheless, throughout the episode, a big focus of the episode is, like I said, Veritas. Veritas, is that everyone reads this message, ends up killing themselves. Now, basically, there was a priest in this episode who kind of locked himself away, and he ended up sending this to a group known as CERN. It's basically a whole bunch of scientists and stuff like that. And Bill and Naruto kind of go off on their own, are kind of traveling all over the place, and it's like, okay, what is this all about? Like, they go through these different portals. One leads them to the Pentagon, one leads obviously to the Vatican, which they went through, and then obviously another one leads them to the CERN facility, and it's like, and then it starts getting Naruto. I think he's like, okay, what are these projectors in this room for? It's like, oh, for the portals or whatever to these. It's like, no, they're not connected. So what is this? And he puts his hand through and he starts digitizing, because it's like the truth that everyone had learned and been killing themselves about is that this whole thing is a simulation, that none of them are actually real. And it's that next level, like, wait, what? Like, to me, my brain immediately goes like, wait, is this some kind of simulation in a sense of like, like, everything, the entire series has been a simulation? But it's like, no, this particular event, like, basically there's some great and powerful demon. The people that pop up in this episode, I don't know whether it's just they're servants of this demon, whoever it is, but it's like a creature is planning to conquer the earth. And so it created a simulation to kind of like, practice run conquering the earth. And it got all this information on people. It's trying to understand who they are and who they, how they act, trying to find the proper means of attack on the planet and everything. And Bill's just kind of like, wait, what? Like, it starts like, because obviously there's a lot of stuff like the president ended up killing himself, like the people at CERN blowing themselves up like that. That's why everyone, I appreciate the fact is that, obviously they made multiple video game references and other references. Like, for example, like the doctor made a reference to Mario. It's like, he's like, basically this whole situation, it's like the equivalent of Mario realizing that he's in a video game. And it's like, he kind of shuts himself down from the game because of the whole like perpetual like thing of like, oh, I'm dying repeatedly over and over again. So I was like, screw that. So because basically the smarter you are, the more likely you are to kind of be able to see that this is a simulation. There are tests to kind of tell, like one of them is the shadow test, that basically you write down a set of numbers in whatever particular order, as many as you want, and then turn the page. And if they're there, then that makes like, for example, in CERN, like the whole situation with them being able to say the exact number, like the fact that Nardole and Bill were thinking the exact same numbers, and everyone in the room was able to kind of say the exact same numbers at the same time too. Because basically they're all part of the same programming, and the programming has all these certain, it's not like each individual like program within the simulation has its own mindset. They're all of one mind. Yes, they have their own personalities and stuff like it's a very deep dive type of situation. So was not the twist I was really expecting. I was like, oh, some monsters or aliens or whatever trying to keep a secret, but it's a lot more than that. I mean, granted, it's like the reason why everyone was killing themselves is because they were just like, yeah, let's get out of this program that's kind of being built. It's like, stop playing the game that you're being played a part of. GTA, that's what it was. Nardo made a reference to GTA. He made a reference to something else, but I can't quite remember. I could look through my notes, but like, oh, it's okay. I was kind of also thinking what we end up finding out is that the doctor is real as well as Bill, but it turns out neither one of them is real. And it seems like, what other situation? If you're familiar with the show Person of Interest, it kind of falls in the same line of this, because there was kind of a situation in the final season. It's kind of spoilers. I won't go into it. Basically, there's a character in Person of Interest that kind of got stuck in a simulation over and over again, and that's what this situation was kind of is. So it's like it just added like a different meta to this show, especially because it ties it all into the very beginning where there's an email popping up in his sunglasses, and I'm like, wait, I was like, okay, and it's like, nope, the reason why this all played out like this is because like the doctor within the simulation recorded it all, because it's like, oh yeah, I've died multiple times in these simulations. I might not be the real doctor, but the doctor is still a doctor. Like, even if I'm not the doctor, the fact of the matter is I can do what everyone else does when there's trouble, call the doctor. So he sends the recording of everything that he's experienced to the doctor, so it all kind of gets implanted into the doctor's mind through the whole, like, basically the link between his shades and his brain, which, if I didn't bring it up this recording, because this is like the second time I'm recording this, but nevertheless, if I didn't bring it up earlier, the fact of the matter is that it's kind of interesting that he can't see people. Like, it gives all this information and stuff like, oh, it's a male 26, blah, blah, blah. But he can kind of see rough edgings of like objects and stuff like that, which I'm trying to understand why that's specifically like that, because I thought it was like, okay, like it's mapped out stuff that he's kind of familiar with, but he's going to territory he's never been to before. Not unless that's part of the simulation and stuff like that it was auto-filling in stuff because it's part of the programming, and it kind of give him an advantage just walking around, but he didn't want to make it too obvious that it's a program, so it kind of removed people and stuff like that. Maybe that's the case, maybe I'm not, like, maybe I was reading too much into that, or whatever the case may be, but I thought it was kind of interesting that it can make out object, but they can't make out people. I don't know. Nevertheless, so whether or not the simulation has been shut down, I don't think it has. Obviously, the simulation is going to keep going. Obviously, we see kind of shut down there in the episode, but I'm sure it's still ongoing. But it was just kind of like that doctor's final move was to do that. So now the simulation's kind of got to restart again. Multiple interesting things about that. I mean, that in itself is just set up for like, okay, so this is us setting up like what I would guess is like the next thing they're going to deal with. I don't think it's like, oh, this is the ultimate baddie of the season. It's like, no, it's the next threat. It's just kind of interesting. Like I said, it's just a very meta thing of just kind of very Matrixy. I don't know why my brain didn't immediately go there first, but still, nevertheless. a very interesting thing that kind of popped up in this episode, and that's going to be something I'm curious if that's what the Doctor might actually do going forward. It might not be the case. I mean, he probably only will do it if it's 100% necessary. And the fact is that he can actually do something. There's something he can do that basically he can temporarily take something from his future self, like in this particular case, his eyesight, but only for a few moments. But he will have to pay it back. There will be a price for that. For example, like, he says that basically because he is doing this, something will be taken from him in the future. He doesn't know specifically what, but for example, like his next regeneration might be blind or something like that. And another thing is maybe he doesn't get another regeneration. Maybe now he ends up dying in the next 20 minutes or something like that. That was very fascinating. Has that come up before? Being able to well, obviously within the first levels of regeneration, something's come like the closest thing is like when the 10th Doctor had his hand cut off, but like that was like during the early stages of his regeneration, and so he was able to grow his hand back immediately, which in itself is kind of connected to the old Torchwood situation, which I found out like during the previews and everything. It's like they're marathoning that on the second and third. That's just kind of interesting. I'm wondering why that came out of nowhere, but maybe it's because of the whole situation of like, because that's also going to be like this season. Well, at least June 2nd will be. No, nevertheless, I'm all over the place. It's not important. Ignore me. Nevertheless, which is pretty cool, but nevertheless. But like I said, I don't think the Doctor will necessarily do that because of his simulation self doing it. So maybe he'll be he'll be even more reluctant to do it in the future. But it's like, will that be something he will do? Like, will he do that just to get his eyesight back? I mean, will there be a way to, like, obviously I brought up like last episode that I think the only thing that will help him is a regeneration, but it's like I'm sure he's not all keen to do that. So, but and speaking of regenerations, we kind of saw the other side of this episode where basically there's people known as executioners. Basically, it's their job to know basically how to kill almost anything that exists and lives. And then all of a sudden, like, we had a Doctor there, and it's like, oh man, because basically killing a Time Lord is kind of like a special rarity or whatever. But nevertheless, it's like he's there, and it's like, oh yeah, but basically to execute a specific species, that someone else of that same species had to be there. So it's like, oh, tracking down Time Lords is pretty hard. Considering their current circumstances, I wouldn't be surprised it's hard to track them down. But lo and behold, they're able to track down another one, and it's like Missy. And I'm like, dude, real? I was like, I didn't even cross my mind to think Missy might be connected to all this. And it's like, and then she's like, oh, the last time I heard about you, Doc, is why you here? I thought you were in retirement. The last time I heard you were on that, Dirilium. And then she's like, oh, what, you were like, oh, happily married and stuff. What happened to that? And then it kind of hit me. She's like, Missy, and she's like, oh, I'm sorry for your loss. And then immediately my brain starts going, oh, so the Doctor's trying to, like, because obviously this is at like, oh, so a long time ago. So I was like, okay, so the Doctor wanted to die because it's like, he's sad about the whole River Song situation. It's like, oh no, actually this execution isn't for the Doctor. It's actually for Missy. Now, Missy's done a lot of stuff, but it's like, what did she do in particular to kind of warrant being executed? I didn't really understand that. And then Nardole pops up, because basically he was told by River to stick by the Doctor, kick his ass if necessary. A line he ends up kind of repeating to Bill later on at one point in the episode, because it's like, I've gotten permission from your late wife to kick your ass if necessary, to not to do this. So basically he's trying, like, he's there to kind of flip the switch essentially to kill Missy. Because basically there's a whole system to this execution thing where it's like, the moment that person's dead, you have to kind of seal their body away for 1,000 years. Because basically it stops both hearts, and it also prevents them from regenerating. And just on the off chance that, like, oh, there might be a little bit of life that kicks back into the body, it's like they have to kind of the body has to be watched for a bare minimum of 1,000 years. And so then it kind of gets revealed, like, oh, so that's what this is all about, this oath and everything. I was like, so you're watching over Missy's dead body? But it's like, no, because he didn't kill Missy. He tampered with the machines and everything. And it's like, and he put her to sleep, because the fact of the matter is, it's like, yep, that is my friend at the end of the day. So it's kind of interesting, like, after everything the Master's kind of done, that he would kind of, I don't know. I mean, to be fair, it's like, he might not remember a lot of the stuff that she's done, because, like, let's not forget a lot of that Clara stuff is erased from his brain. But it's like, maybe Clara specifically being there is erased, not a lot of the events, like everything connected. What was her boyfriend back in season 8? that she had that sacrificed himself. He kind of got turned into a Cyberman and kind of sacrificed himself. Plus the whole Missy situation of putting Clara being trapped inside of a Dalek and everything. And I was like, will he remember those specific things, or are they kind of erased from his memories and stuff like that? And even then, what about what the Master's done in the past? Like, wasn't it season 4? The Master the Master popped up. That might have been I'm pretty sure that was season 4 that the Master popped up and everything, did what he did. So I don't know. It's just kind of interesting that you would say Missy, but that's what this is all about. The fact of the matter is, like, she's inside of the vault. This oath he took was connected to the execution and stuff like that. That affected, like, I guess there's ramifications for not keeping your oath or whatever. But it's like, the whole point is just to keep I guess that's the danger, because, like, Missy, like, I guess we'll learn in the next episode what it is exactly Missy did to warrant being executed. Like, maybe that's what Nardo was like, oh yeah, it's so dangerous because Missy is so dangerous that, you kind of like, oh, you made a promise to the planet and everything. So I guess that's, I don't know. Like I said, we'll just kind of have to dive deeper into it next episode. And that was kind of an interesting thing, because it's like, I guess because the Doctor saw how things a combination of how the Doctor saw things kind of play out in the simulation with Bill and Penny. He's like, hey, you like her, right? It's like, well, yeah, she's out of my league or whatever. It's like, no, she's not out of your league. The fact of the matter is, you like her, right? It's like, well, yeah, I mean, call her up, or, maybe I'll talk to her in, like, tomorrow. It's like, no, call her tonight. Basically, things are going to get we're going to get very busy going forward. So do it now, kind of like, we don't know what tomorrow brings. And I think that kind of put things in perspective for him, because also I think it might be like, things didn't work out for Bill in the simulation, so it's like, I'll make things kind of work out for it in real life and everything like that. At least that's where my mindset's about. So makes you wonder also, will he actually tell her now? He saw keeping that secret, how it worked out in the simulation. Will he do it in real life? Like I said, a lot of questions we'll just kind of have to wait till next episode to get answers to, but, like, very, very good episode with all just the story developments and stuff like that. Like, you're kind of seeing, I guess, like, the overarching arc, I mean, because usually, personally, for me, I feel like I never really know what the arc of, like, Doctor Who is until, like, you start getting closer to the end, and then you're like, okay, so now all the pieces are starting to line up, essentially. I mean, we are past the halfway mark to this season, so maybe that's why it's kind of starting, like, all the main plot points are kind of starting to fall into place, at least, in my opinion. So, like I said, we'll have to wait till next week to see where everything kind of goes. And now moving on to this week's episode of Class, a fantastic episode, so good. Basically, really quickly, the episode was about Charlie being put in detention with the rest of the group, Tanya, Ram, Mateus, as well as April, all of them being put in detention by Quill, and she locks the door. It's like, oh, this way you kind of stay out of trouble, blah, blah, blah. Basically, Charlie starts freaking out because he's claustrophobic. While they're opening the door, at the same time, there's some they're asteroids. They're meteors once they enter our atmosphere. Like, that's always been something I've ever been confused with. It's kind of like the magma and lava situation. Like, I think magma is below, but the moment it touches the surface, it becomes lava. I think it's kind of a similar situation. But nevertheless, it's like the moment they open the door, like, obviously when it hits the tear, like, part of the asteroid breaks off, it comes through and hits the classroom. Basically, it traps them. They end up later on finding out they were basically trapped inside of a prison. That basically this little rock thing that they're with is kind of like the consciousness of a prisoner has been sealed in this rock and everything, and that they're trapped in this prison. That basically, like, it's kind of like a portal. Like, the moment, like, the darkness, it's part of the trap. That the moment you stick your hand through, all of a sudden your hand comes back out. Like, everything's a part of the trap. Like, I guess in a sense, like, because the way they explain it is like the moment it hit, it knocked them out of time and space. So what my understanding is like, it's a void of nothingness, but that kind of reflects back. Because the moment Charlie stuck his hand in, it came back through on the other side. So it's like, and a very interesting rock where basically it's to keep its prisoners bound by their guilt, that basically they have to confess whatever it is that they might not be confessing, and that basically one by one everyone in the classroom has to basically confess a lot of stuff that a lot of people, I'm sure, definitely want to keep secret. Obviously Mateo brings up the fact that it matters how he feels about Charlie. It's like, I love you and everything, but the fact of the matter is you scare me sometimes, because scary knowing what you are and what you could be capable of and everything. The fact is that we are different. I'm a human, you're Rodian. Then, Ram, oh yeah, I love you, April, but I think I love you more than you love me. And the thing is, I can see it. I don't want it to be this way, but I can see the fact is that you will never love me as much as I love you. Which April kind of later on, kind of confirms. The fact of the matter is, because she's afraid, because it's like Ram's falling for her so quickly, and because of that, it's like the fact that you fell so fast makes me think it's not real, and the fact that it won't last. Tanya kind of feels like an outsider, because she's like, everyone kind of treats me like a kid, like I'm only around because you guys can tolerate me. It's not like you really want to be my friends and everything. Just everyone's kind of insecurities and stuff like that. On top of it, this thing is also fueling their rage and everything. Which later on, because as they each spill their truths, this thing has to spill its truth as well. Just kind of how it works. So it kind of forces their hand. I mean, granted, if you hold on to it long, it will fry your brain and kill you and everything. So everyone's kind of playing hot potato, and it just makes everyone mad because of a combination of all the truths that are being spoken, and just this thing, because apparently there were four other prisoners at least in this particular fragment, but the prisoner ended up killing the rest of them. And it's like, the moment they said five, because this is where my mind initially went. Like, the moment it was like, oh, they're five. He's like, oh yeah, he killed the four other people with him. I was like, is this some kind of weird timing thing? Because it's like, we have, Charlie in here with everyone else, and I'm like, okay, that's a total of 5 people. So I was like, is this supposed to be a reflection of that? Like, I was like, did this thing tap into Charlie's brain and just kind of do something? I don't know. I thought maybe something like that happened. I wasn't sure. Like, maybe this thing was like reflecting him, especially because it seemed like, because I immediately noticed, I was like, Charlie doesn't seem like he's affected by this like everyone else is. Everyone's getting angrier and angrier, but Charlie's not really. I don't know. Like, the whole situation, it wasn't fueling the fire inside of him like it did everyone else. It's just kind of like, it's basically a lot of the stuff that they're like friends and they're great pals and everything, but it's like below the surface they really didn't know each other, and they've been hiding so much from each other. Like, because there's a lot of things where it's like, in these particular situations you would consider white lies, things that you don't want to say, things you might lie about for the sake of not hurting someone else. But it's a situation that you have to tell the honest truth, like your truth, because it has to be said because of the Rock and everything, because it's like they have to find out where they are, what their particular situation is and everything. So, but because the only way to escape the prison is death. So in a way, I guess the prisoner is kind of thinking like, I gave them a mercy by us telling our truths and our anger building and everything. I'm the last one standing. So, I mean, really, we never really found out like what particular species he was. I mean, the fact of the matter is, like, the fact is, it kind of shows you how big that prison is too, because it's like in this small amount of rock is at least one person. Like, because that could be misunderstanding it. Maybe when it was a part of the bigger rock, maybe there were others. But at very least, to me, my understanding seems like in this particular rock, there were 4 others trapped in it. So there were like 4 or 5 of those asteroids. So it's like, how many prisoners are in there? Like, where are they from? Like, who sets up a prison like that? Maybe those are things we'll get answers to next episode. Maybe they're things we'll never get answers to. Makes you wonder what happened to the rest of the asteroids too. Are they just floating around in space? I mean, maybe that's the point of them. Like, they're meant to be like, you're meant to be trapped in this place filled with so much guilt, traveling to stars. But because it rammed against like the tear, that's when it happened. They would have just never really. I guess they're in a route so that they never really run into anything. So on top of all this, like, you have Charlie being claustrophobic, being having a panic attack, not even knowing what that's about, and just all these truths and everything, and everyone getting mad. I mean, the big premise of this episode is the fact is that, like, it was very, I don't know how would I phrase it, like shallow, like not. Basically, the foundation of their friendship is kind of built very shallowly. The fact is that in this episode, it so easily broke apart. I mean, to be fair, any relationship would have been tested in that type of situation where it's just like so much anger and truths being spoken. Like even the most trustworthy of relationships would have been tested at that point in time. So it ended up kind of like, because a lot of times it's like we're friends out of circumstance. It's because of this particular situation. We met each other, bumped each other, all these different things. The Shadow can attack him when they did. That led to us being where we are. Like obviously, like I said, everyone kind of has their particular, because it's something April kind of brings up later on to Tanya, because Tanya feels like the outsider, like the one. It's like for one, she's younger than everyone else and stuff like that. But it's like, you know, everyone's got their situation. You know, Charlie being an alien prince, Mateo's got his whole situation with his family. Ram's got the missing leg situation. So, and she's like, I'm sharing a heart with a king alien creature. So it's like, everyone's got their issues, but it's like, you know, Talia kind of shuts her down, mainly because it's like she was so mad and everything. But later on, she kind of points it out too. Like, yeah, I kind of shut her up before she could really finish. But everyone's got their issues, and even Charlie does, because for Charlie, he's like, he even says he's like, I love you, Mateus, but the fact of the matter is, on some level, I also hate you, because you were the one thing that keeps me from doing what I want to do, wiping out the Shadow King. And I could, but the fact is, I don't want to give up hope of my people and stuff like that. And you know, because genociding one particular race to make up for the genocide of another, like that's what he's kind of explaining to Quill, because she's still pissed about him not using the Cabinet of Souls, which I guess that kind of came out in the open because no one really asked too many questions about it. So I'm guessing like, no, they already know about it. I guess they kind of got filled in last episode and everything. But because for Charlie, he kind of puts it out there, like the reason why he's so weird and everything is because he's never actually had friends before. He doesn't have anyone outside of this group. Like the closest thing he brings up is like the closest thing he had of a friend was a guy who wrote his speeches and everything. It's like he's been a prince obviously his whole life, and it's like those duties are all that there were. Like, you know, princes don't have friends. It's something he's brought up before. Like the fact of the matter is, relationships and stuff on Rodeo were just kind of like a business transaction of like convenience. There was kind of no love, like, you know, there was no marriages, there were no, like, you know, connections based on feeling. Like for him, it's like the fact of the matter is, the only reason why I might have been of importance to my family isn't out of love, but rather out of the circumstance of like, hey, I could be useful later on as a bargaining chip to put me together with another person from another family or something like that, you know. So but I was kind of impressed when Charlie kind of grabs onto the stone and the stone's like, confess. He's like, no, you confess, to the point his nose starts bleeding, his eyes starts bleeding and everything. But he was able to luckily get everyone out of the prison by destroying the crystal, because he's like, the fact of the matter is, it's like, he's like, what is it that you need to confess? You confess. And he's like, you are, and he's like, what am I? He's like, you are my murderer. And he's like, that's right. And it destroys the crystal, the meteor. But granted, that just seemed like just to release him, because he's like, Charlie's like, okay, guys, I think I did something stupid. And he starts, because basically, no, I got that wrong, because like he's dead, but the prison always needs a prisoner, so it was going to drag him away. But luckily for him, Quill showed up when she did, which unluckily for him, because he finds out, oh yeah, she got the thing removed, and she's like, oh yeah, things are going to be very different from now on. So as I brought up, like obviously I knew sooner or later he's going to have to suffer the ramifications for doing what he did, treating her like a slave, which to him is like, it's not you being a slave, it's your punishment for everything that you've done. But the fact of the matter is, what does this mean now? Like I said, the fallout is real. Everyone's pissed off at everyone. Ram pissed because April will never love him the way he loves her. Tanya, like April kind of snapping at Tanya because it's like, oh, you'll never really know because you've never had a boyfriend. Obviously, Mateus and Charlie have a lot to kind of talk about their issues and everything. But it's like this group that it's like, oh, we stood together, we fought everything. But it's like I said, their foundation was very flimsy, because the fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, they held so much back, but the fact, because no one wanted to speak the truth and everything, because the fact of the matter is, they didn't really know each other, they didn't really like each other. Like I said, it was friendships born, founded by convenience. It's just kind of like we all ended up in this particular situation and stuff. So I'm sure the next episode will be dealing with this whole situation. Like, I don't know, maybe we'll get more of the meteors, or maybe, in particular, just trying to get the group back there. And I feel like at the end of the day, it's going to be up to Charlie to do that. But also, what does this mean going forward with Quill. Like, the fact of the matter is she's free now she has her own will back. So anytime Charlie and them are in danger, she's not going to help. Even if it's something that's in danger in the planet, it's like, I don't care. Like, I mean, what does that mean for her? What would she do now? Will she try and hurt Charlie? The fact that she has her free will of her own, does that mean she's going to try and use the Cabinet of Souls for herself? I mean, because obviously the governors and stuff like that, they know like exactly what kind of mindset she has, and they probably, like, obviously last episode they brought up all these things of like, oh, there's a good chance you would have betrayed us and stuff like that. So they probably have access to the knowledge of knowing like what there are most likely some different scenarios of like, oh, she's going to do this or that. So I guess for them, it's like better that she has her own free will so that she can be their hired gun to do whatever they need to do. So I was kind of hoping by the end of the episode, Charlie and them would get back and then he'd make the decision like, hey, after everything that's happened, make the decision to help Quill. Because I knew if he did it first, then maybe Quill would be less reluctant to take vengeance on him. But obviously she got help of her own, so she's free of it, no help of Charlie. So it's like I said, what does that mean going forward? Because like I get the feeling like now that she's free, she can kind of go and do whatever she wants to. I mean, and that's why I'm still going like, I mean, the fact of the matter is she would never be able to use the Cabinet of Souls. So I think now to take that back, she might not ever kill Charlie. I mean, like, she might make his life a living hell, might make things harder for him at school. He can no longer boss her around, which I'm sure Tanya will be like, I told you so, you shouldn't treat her like a slave. Which, once again, it's like he has his own ways about everything. It's like, because everyone, like, it kind of came up in the episode that everyone kind of treats him like, oh, you're the idiotic prince. Oh, you want to act all high and mighty and stuff. It's like being a prince is all he knows. Like, you've lived your life a certain way for so long, that's all you've known. And the fact of the matter is, he even had to ask questions like, oh, are we friends again? Which basically, obviously, she was still a little pissed at the time. But Tanya's kind of like, you idiot, of course we're still friends. We were never not friends and everything. Which, now, like I said, the end of the episode kind of brings that into question and stuff like that. But, like, I don't know, at the very least, it does seem like the situation will, if they can manage to come back together, it will make them stronger in the end. Granted, don't know where the whole April and Ram situation is going to fall in this particular scenario. Guess each going to get, respective help from their particular parent about this whole situation. So, because I felt like, going back to it, like Quinn would be able to go wherever she wants to, but it's like her need for revenge against the Shadowkin probably won't let her. So she'll try and probably find some way to kind of force Charlie into helping her. I don't know, especially now she could use a gun, kill anyone that gets in her way type of thing. So, I don't know. Like I said, maybe we'll see going forward that either Charlie might say or do something that changes Quill's mind, or the fact of the matter is that Quill isn't the bloodthirsty kind of bad person that Charlie makes her out to be. I mean, granted, who she was on Rhodia might be very different than who she is now on Earth. So, a lot of that stuff's got to be taken into consideration. But it's like, also because like, from the very beginning, like Quill never felt like part of the group. Even amongst all of them, they're a group of outcasts and outsiders themselves, obviously with their own particular situation. But even amongst them, even amongst the outsiders, she was an outsider too. No one really liked her, really trusted her. So I'm sure it's definitely going to be interesting, depending on whatever circumstances might be coming their way, whether it's alien or whatever the case may be. Like, because they're definitely not going to get any help from Quill, because, it's like, if it affects her own personal life, sure. And also, I brought it up last episode, who's to say the governors haven't tampered with her? It's like, oh, they removed something from you, but who's to say they didn't put something else in return? I mean, the fact is, they are going to want something in return. Like, it just seems so weird that they would give you such freedom as like, oh, giving you free will and everything, even though it seems like they necessarily want/need you going forward. So, like I said, a lot of this, just me rambling on. We'll just have to see what happens in the next episode. So, but really, that's all I want to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.